Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot, and in today's video we are going to play fuel ping pong. Now, what does fuel ping pong actually mean? It is a term that's used a lot between 737 pilots for when you are trying to balance fuel unnecessarily and then cause an imbalance on the other side. Now, this happens quite a bit on the 737, which is the reason why in my former airline where I flew it, we actually had SOPs in place in order to prevent that very thing from happening. Now, many flight simmers ask me what the maximum fuel imbalance is that I would expect or that I would accept before actually conducting a fuel balance procedure. Now, if we have a look down here, you can see I have created a little bit of an imbalance before the flight. Now, this is just about 130 kilograms, and obviously 130 kilograms is a lot of weight, but let's admit it, this airplane over here weighs quite a bit more, weighing in some 60 to 70 tons usually. So 130 kilograms isn't that much. Now, there is no hard limit defined on paper between what the maximum imbalance is before you should start the procedure. However, there is a certain limit before which the airplane is going to give you the fuel imbalance alert, and that does require the procedure. So let's say that unless you get an alert, you are not required to start a fuel balancing procedure. But where does the alert come from? It does usually appear at 1,000 pounds or 450 roughly kilograms difference between the two tanks. Now, obviously, as a pilot, when you do see an imbalance developing, then you should act before you actually get an alert from the airplane. Now, my former operator defined the maximum weight limit or the maximum difference in fuel imbalance at 400 kilos. If you had less than 400 kilos of imbalance, you were not expected to start the fuel balancing procedure for the very reason that you might just start to play fuel ping pong. Now, let's have a look at the procedure itself, and then I'm going to explain a little bit more about the actual ping pong procedure. So, as always, in Boeing aircraft, procedures are allowed to be done from memory if no hazard is created by doing so. This means, as the fuel balancing procedure is a pretty simple procedure, we can carry it out from memory. Now, before we do that, obviously we would run our standard checks, we would check for a fuel leak and so on. Assuming that we have determined that no fuel leak exists, let's go ahead and start working the procedure. So, we do have our fuel pumps up here. Now, right now there is no fuel in the main tanks. That makes our life easy. But let's start with the wing tanks then. The first step of the procedure is always to operate the crossfeed valve and to check that it is operating correctly. So when you turn the knob, you see the light coming up in bright and then it goes dim. And that is your indication that the valve has moved. That's when it is bright. And then goes dim. That is when it matches the open position of the crossfeed selector. Now, with the fuel crossfeed open, we can go ahead and turn off some fuel pumps. Which ones do we turn off? Well, that's quite easy. There is a little mnemonic there. Low must go. So the pumps on the low side must be turned off. In this case, we're talking about the left-hand pumps here, as that is less fuel. So let's go ahead and turn those left fuel pumps off. We do have two low pressure lights here. That means we do get the master caution with the fuel indicator, but we can simply cancel that away. Now, with the fuel balancing now in effect, let's go ahead and start our clock. Typical fuel usage of a 737 in cruise flight is approximately 40 kilograms of fuel per minute. That means with an imbalance of now 120 kilos, we are looking at 3 minutes to complete the fuel balancing procedure. In my former airline, it was standard operating procedure that you now took the checklist from the glass shield and placed it in between the thrust levers. This was a very clear, very hard to miss indication that fuel balancing is currently going on. Now, why do we need to do that? Basically because it is very, very easy to forget about this. Let's say air traffic control disturbs you, or maybe the cabin crew comes in and disturb you. It is very easy to overbalance the fuel and then create an imbalance on the other side. And this is what we call playing fuel ping pong. Because as soon as you've created the imbalance on the other side, you are going to reverse the pump switching. You're going to switch on the left pumps, switch off the right pumps, then you start pumping fuel around, or pumping fuel around in this case just means using fuel from one side. You actually have no ability to actually transfer fuel from one tank to another in the 737, with the exception of this fuel scavenge pump, but that would be a different topic, just mentioning that for completeness. Now, in my opinion, or rather in my experience, when you do start playing fuel ping pong, chances are you are going to overbalance. Now, why is that? Well, the fuel gauges on the Boeing 737, just like any other aircraft literally, are not very accurate. They have a tendency to lag behind what the aircraft is actually doing. Therefore, if you waited until the fuel on the side that had more fuel initially equals the indication on the other side, and then you turn on all the pumps, you can be pretty sure that you will have overbalanced and will have run low on the other hand side. Therefore, many flight simmers are or have that tendency to start fuel balancing, even if you've just got some 20 or 40 kilogram of difference. Don't do that, it's not worth it. You are just going to overbalance. Now, the PMDG currently does not reflect that lag in the fuel gauge that accurately. It does have some effects simulated there, but this particular effect between the wing tanks is lagging behind a little bit. But nonetheless, I still recommend that you use your clock as the primary reference there. You can see we're now 20 kilos apart, using 40 kilos a minute. You can see the timer was just about at 30 seconds there. So by the time we reach 3 minutes, the fuel balancing will be complete. Now let's see that in action. We've got the last 10 seconds running through over here, and then we should pretty much be right in balance. Here we go, and you can see this was pretty accurate. Okay, so very important, turn the pumps on again, verify the low pressure light is out before you are closing the crossfeed. This is very, very important, as otherwise it can happen that on one side you are not going to have fuel pumps running. Now, there is a little bit of a myth in the flight simulation community that engines would immediately go out if the fuel pumps went out. That's not the case. You can see if I'm just turning those pumps off again, the engine continues to run fine. That is because the engine does create quite a bit of suction there, and many aircraft actually have a DC fuel pump. Remember, those are just the AC driven fuel pumps that you can control on the panels. Many engines also have a DC driven fuel pump that still sucks fuel right from the tank, and therefore the engines do continue to run. However, what the AC driven fuel pumps actually achieve is to prevent, or rather to keep the fuel under pressure and therefore prevent air bubbles from forming in the fuel pipes. When those air bubbles form, then chances are when too much air enters the combustion chamber at the same time, you might get thrust variations, which might eventually lead all the way to the engine quitting. So in order to avoid that from happening, make sure that you turn on the AC fuel pumps before you close the crossfeed. A final word there talking about the fuel balancing. If the crossfeed is open and all the main fuel pumps are running, then in the simulation you won't have any problems. In the real world you will encounter problems. That is because even though the fuel pumps are obviously the same units installed, they are only accurate to a certain degree. The manufacturing specifications give the pumps a certain range of pressure that they need to deliver. Now, if the crossfeed is open and one pump is stronger than the others, then only that single pump is going to feed both engines, thereby only using fuel from a single engine. This very much follows the principle of center tank fuel pumps, which operate at a higher pressure than the main tank pumps, and for this reason, when the center tank pumps are on, fuel is going to be used from the center tank rather than the wing tanks. It's simply because the pumps operate at a higher pressure. But the same applies to any given fuel pump. One pump is going to be the strongest, and only that tank is going to provide fuel to the engines if the cross-feed valve is open. So that is quite a reason why you need to be careful with the cross-feed valve, so that you can avoid feeding the engines from only a single tank. Now, one final word over here before we close this video, and that is on closing the cross-feed valve. When the valve is being closed, you can see it goes bright, and then the light goes off. On the 737NG, not on the MAX, but on the NG, the light of the cross-feed valve is coupled to the same circuit breaker as the actual valve. Therefore, if the valve encounters a problem operating while you are trying to close the cross-feed valve, and the circuit breaker pops and the valve stops somewhere in a transit position, the light is going to go out, just like in your standard procedure if the system operated correctly. Therefore, whenever you are closing the crossfeed, it is a good idea to press in that button in order to check that the bulbs are operating. Now, on the PMDG 737 that is not simulated, but you can just do a quick light test, make sure that the light bulbs still illuminate and therefore the circuit breaker is not popped. Alright, this much about playing fuel ping pong. I do hope that you enjoyed this video and enjoyed a little insight into operation of the real 737 aircraft. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I do hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to let me know what you think about it in the comments below. And as always, if you're up for more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Finally, if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. But until then, I would like to say thank you very much, and I see you all again on the next one.